Hello, St. Paul's. Many of you know our beloved First Cathedral Dean, the Very Reverend James E. Carroll. Jim is part of our congregational history and still going strong in his 90s. I was looking forward to interviewing him this week via Zoom, but unfortunately, technical issues ensued. However, luckily for us, Jim's son John is a TV professional, and he graciously agreed to ask Jim my questions and capture the conversation on camera. I hope you enjoy watching or reading it as much as I did. See you on Sunday.
Tell us about your call to serve St. Paul's.
Well, the call was an interesting series of events from the time I was a young acolyte at the old St. Paul's on 8th and C Street in downtown San Diego. And then years later, after ordination, I was asked if I was to be interested in becoming rector of St. Paul's. And I thought, oh, my. And I expressed some interest, but then I had been called to be dean of the cathedral in Chicago, which was a high calling, and grateful to be asked to do it. And no way could I leave that to go to my home parish. And then 2 years later, St. Paul's was vacant again, and the bishop of San Diego, Bob Walterstorff, once again asked if I would be interested. And this time I was, and some people from St. Paul's talked to me, came to see me, and it progressed to the point where they were ready to issue me a call to be rector of the parish, and with in the background fashioning St. Paul's to become the dean of the new Diocese of San Diego. So while many people say you can't go home, and I took that seriously, I did go home. And I became rector, and we began to establish guidelines for it to be what the Union Tribune called the first Protestant cathedral in San Diego. And that actually happened in, I believe the year was 1951. And no, it was still the parish church of which I was rector. But after I had been there a few years, the bishop, Brinkley Morton, who had come from a cathedral in Alabama, thought we should have that kind of symbolic ministry in San Diego. So he and I appointed a committee that met for almost a year to delineate our design and what we're trying to achieve. So that was expressed in real life history on January 25th, 1985. We had the messages from the governor, the mayor of the city, and Archbishop of Canterbury, and we dissolved as the parish and were reconstituted as the Cathedral Church. Cathedrals are important in the Anglican tradition and in other traditions as well, but most likely in the Western Catholic tradition in Europe, the medieval Church of Rome, and skipping over the channel to England and Scotland, where cathedrals were the places where the bishops concentrated on their ministry and their teaching. And when the bishop sat to teach, the chair was called a cathedra. And the bishop sat as the ancient rabbis always sought to teach, and sat while teaching in an authoritative way. So as many people know, some of the famous cathedrals in England, such as Canterbury and York and Chichester and Southwell and so on, were at one time abbey churches until after the Reformation, when the abbeys became cathedrals and the church in England became the Church of England. I've also been asked by Dean Penny and others what are some of the features during my ministry there that stood out as
Dad, let me just ask you questions. Okay,
please.
so you already said that. Okay, so the next one is, what do you remember about the process leading up to St. Paul's Cathedral becoming the cathedral? Now, you already said some of that, but
Yeah.
do you want to say any more about that?
Well, the process began with Brinkley Morton, the bishop, and myself selecting a committee that met weekly for several months. And in that process, we wrote American cathedral deans to ask for their canons and constitutions and what they had to do to reform and remake that image. And we were supported by good friends in Washington, New York, Seattle, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and elsewhere. And out of those responses, we fashioned our own canons. For example, the vestry became a chapter, and the vestry wardens were joined by a lay person who was not a member of the cathedral, who became the bishop's warden, so that the bishop always had a hand in the ongoing ministry of the cathedral. We also made it our goal to be leaders in stewardship of the diocese and not to fall behind in our mission pledge. And we did quite well with that in competition with a couple of the other large parishes. But we felt good about that. And we also were determined to fashion a liturgical tradition that would be drawing on the best of the Anglican communion and on the needs of the American church. And I had a good staff that did, beginning with Alden Franklin and a few others as the years went on, to fulfill that role as it does to this day. So I was also asked by Dean Penny about what was the meaningful event or events.
He said, what kind of ceremony was there?
And the ceremony we used was, of course, when I was instituted from the Book of Common Prayer, it's called the Institution of Ministers, and then a celebration of the Eucharist, and the new rector or dean, in this case, pronounces the final blessing instead of the bishop, and he does that after he makes in kneeling as sort of an oath of office that we took very seriously, and I did. So one event, obviously, as some of you would know, was the royal visit in February of 1983, when the British Consul General in Los Angeles telephoned us and asked if the Queen could go to church at St. Paul's. And this is before we were formally a cathedral. And we said, well, yes, I think so. And so I appointed a committee on the royal visit that met for several months, beginning in October, for a visit in February the following year. And in that committee, we discerned some of the issues and the ceremonies and the right things you do with royalty. And it meant a lot to us. It was fun. We were photographed from all over the world. New York Times put us on the cover. The London Times put me on the cover. And how else do you get on the cover of the London Times? So that was a high point in my ministry at St. Paul's. And there is the only low points were when we became friendly with the surrounding community, many of whom were gay persons and we welcomed them into our fellowship. And I remember one event where two gentlemen of the parish came in to complain, and it disturbed me greatly, but we were unmoved, and we continued to be an inclusive, all-embracing parish, honoring the gay people and the LGBTQ, so on, as many of you are familiar with.
Okay, Dan, you gotta reach stopping points so I can ask you questions.
Okay.
All right. So you already said what kind of ceremony and process. How has St. Paul's Cathedral's mission and ministry changed since becoming a cathedral, and on from that under successive deans? How has its mission and ministry changed over the years?
The mission and ministry of St. Paul's changed somewhat, not in a radical direction, but in a gradual ascent to the meaning of inclusivity, and the fact that we live almost on the Mexican border, and that we had a responsibility to minister to Latinos. And we then actually started a Spanish-speaking mass once a month, and that gradually grew to every Sunday at a particular hour, and that was a definitive change, not pleasing to everybody, but certainly in accordance with the gospel demand to go to all nations. Also, we considered ourselves to be open and inclusive of whoever entered our doors, and we dealt with the issues of who could receive communion and who couldn't, which has been an ongoing interior struggle in the Episcopal Church and other churches as well. And we addressed that issue with care and compassion as we went forward. That's even to this day, I would say.
Okay.
Well, the fact we had the Queen in my hospital room. So after a while, I said the Queen was tired and she took him home. But that's the high point. And the other high points would be the influx of people looking for God's word fearlessly proclaimed, but in love, especially with the HIV/AIDS crisis, where every Sunday in our intercessory prayer, we prayed for those battling HIV/AIDS throughout the world, an international crisis. And we took a little flack for that, but it was a commitment in prayer to what eventually was engaged by our own country and is still being engaged to this day, partially because of the witness of people like St. Paul's Cathedral and others expressing God's healing love to those suffering from a worldwide crisis.
For sure. And then there was the one thing where the guy, oh dear, I'm forgetting, he was the owner of some big gay bar in town, and he died, and the Roman Catholic diocese would not allow him to be buried out of St. Joseph Cathedral or any of their places, and they came to you. Do you remember that?
Yeah, that's a difficult issue, but I can address it, and I don't remember the name.
Right, I forget his name too.
Yeah.
But, gosh darn it, if Mark were here, he'd know.
Well, some of you may be interested in an event several years before I retired, when a prominent Roman Catholic family was denied a burial in a Catholic cemetery because the deceased had been a gay person, and I think had died of complications due to AIDS, and it rattled that family. So I stepped out with care and invited the family to St. Paul's, and we gave the young man Christian burial in consecrated ground. And we felt good about that, and we got no feedback from the Roman Catholic officials because I think they knew what had to be done.
Yeah. Finally, what is your dream for St. Paul's Cathedral?
The dream I have for St. Paul's, having retired some 26 years ago, is that it will continue as the leader of the diocese in terms of stewardship and mission, and set an example in worship, pastoral care, and willingness to stand up for truth in a prophetic manner, truth in the face of falsehood, and love in the face of alienation. A cathedral church can do that with more strength than others. And my dream for St. Paul's Cathedral is to continue in that kind of witness.